Welcome, everyone, to the Everything Show, episode 286. I am your host, Matrix Lord 212, and I'm with Connor Farley. What's up, Connor?
Hello.
Okay, so what do you have for us, sir?
Right. This is not. I don't need an article for this. Today I was leaving college because I'm on work experience, and it was a good day. I left college about 4:30, and I immediately went onto Twitter, and my Twitter feed exploded.
Right.
Saying, "Rest in peace, Terry Pratchett." And anyone that knows me, particularly my immediate family, will know how much of an impact Terry Pratchett's work has had on me personally since for the past 11, 12 years.
Wow.
Before I even knew what Doctor Who was, I knew who Terry Pratchett was. His work, over 70 books published in a 44-year career, in the science fiction and fantasy, books. His science fiction and fantasy books captured so many people's imaginations. In terms of imagination, he can't be matched, and he will never be matched, because this guy had the biggest imagination possible. He kept going. He just kept going and kept going. And in 2009, I think it was, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's / dementia, and it didn't stop him.
Wow.
He kept going. He was losing himself, and he kept going. He must have written about 10, 15 books in the period that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and now his eventual death.
If I could just interrupt in 2 seconds. When you're motivated and you're passionate and you have that happiness in your heart to write, like that craving, that drive, right? You realize what you're capable of. All right. I popped out 10 books published in like 2 years, like 5 days over 2 years. 2 years, 10 books. So this guy, 70 friggin' books. My God. At some point in time, he must have been working on literally 5 or 6 books at a time. I mean, more than 70 books. And how old was he?
He was 66 when he died.
More than his age, the books.
Yeah.
That's amazing. The guy obviously put his soul into those books. All right, so I just wanted to throw that out there, just because I know what it's like to be happy with what you're doing, like writing. So
he started his career. It would have been in 1983,
okay.
Around that period, with The Colour of Magic, which any fan of science, particularly fantasy, would know probably what The Colour of Magic is, because it's one of those books that set the precedent for the future, because it was, just so popular, and it was so ridiculously different at the time. He described it as a mixture between the good, the bad, and the ugly of fantasy, because that's what he wrote it as. It was meant to be a spoof of, what he believed to be good, the bad, and the ugly of fashion literature.
Right.
And since then, his series was called the Discworld series, which is basically a world that's a disc, sat on top of a turtle. And he's written, it would have been 41 books for that series alone.
Wow.
It's one of the longest running book series of all time. And the refreshing thing to know is that we're at least going to get one more because he finished his final book.
Oh, wow.
Which, unlike most writers, you know, because most writers don't get the chance to even do that.
Right.
He at
What's
least.
the name of that one?
The name of that one is The Shepherd's Crow, I believe. It's about it's the fifth book in the Tiffany Aching kind of story arc, which most Pratchett fans will know about. She's basically an apprentice witch.
Right.
She's, a young witch, and it's the fifth book in her kind of storyline. But there's been so many characters. Pratchett was the one that established the Grim Reaper, Death, in fantasy, because he wrote a character called Death.
Oh wow! So he's the one that came up with the concept.
Yeah, and ever since, Death has been prominent in pretty much most of his books, and he did that particularly from 2008 on, 2009, because he knew he was going to die. Wow. Because he got Alzheimer's. And
now this, even though he finished this book, right? Was there anything else that he was starting another book or no?
I don't know, but he had an assistant who I think knows Pratchett well enough, and is like in Pratchett's thoughts, like kind of like he knows how Pratchett worked.
Right. So would he be able to finish any books that he's done or no?
I think he may write one more, because what Pratchett did is, because of the Alzheimer's, he couldn't write himself. He couldn't actually be the person that typed.
Right.
So he had to dictate to his assistant Rob, who would then write it on the computer, and then polish the manuscript and everything. But Pratchett, apart from away from his writing, he was a keen. He was an activist in trying to get euthanasia and assisted suicide legal in the UK, because it wasn't. It's only legal in Switzerland with Dignitas.
Right.
And he did a few documentaries, and he talked a lot at public hearings and stuff about assisted suicide and how it should be legal, because there are people out there, unlike him, although it's known that he thought about it a lot of times, who just couldn't cope with Alzheimer's,
right,
and stuff. And he did a documentary, it must have been 2011, 2012, called Choosing to Die. It seriously is one of the most, heartbreaking, impactful documentaries I've ever seen. His opening monologue, kind of like, it's heart-wrenching, because he's serious, that he wanted it he really wanted it to be legalized, because he met someone with motor neuron disease.
Wow.
And he also traveled to Switzerland with that guy, and watched him die from assisted suicide. And Pratchett did that for many years in various documentaries. But so he was a keen supporter of getting assisted suicide legal, particularly in the UK. But back to his work, he set so many. He was such a huge name in fantasy. He was like, he's up there with J.K. Rowling, stuff like that. People people who have just kind of made fantasy what it is, and he's got so many books out that and also away from the Discworld series, he's got, you know, he must at least have 20 books away from the Discworld series. He's just like, he's covered every age group. He's written for kids, he's written for adults, you know. He's even written for smaller children. It's like, he's just got such a wide spectrum of work.
Right.
That I recommend anyone who likes science fiction and fantasy to definitely read his work, because what Pratchett wrote with so much imagination that you can feel the imagination jumping off the page at you, because it's intelligent, it's witty. He prided himself on comedy. He wrote comedy like no one else could write comedy. He was witty.
Wow.
Everyone you would laugh at his books because he was so he was so intelligent with the way he wrote that, you know, he could incorporate a certain amount of seriousness with, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of barrels of, you know, laughs and comedy, that it kind of made it a lighter read than it might have been had he not. But, you know, since the 1980s, he's just captured so many hearts.
Let me ask you a question. Could you screen share? Like, are you able to show like an outline of like some of his books, like on maybe like Google Images? Like, if you type his, you know, could you show like his first book?
I could probably show you his whole collection.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
You know, for the viewers who have never, you know, read any of his books, maybe this would generate some interest, you know.
Yeah.
Now, does he have any family?
Yeah, his family, he's extremely fortunate, actually. His whole entire family was beside him, even his cat, when he died.
Does he have kids? Do they have grandkids?
I don't think he had kids. I might have had one son, but he was extremely fortunate in the fact that he managed, because it was so like, he expected it, but he didn't know when, because it's Alzheimer's. You don't know when, you know, you're gonna take your final breath. He was extremely fortunate to have anyone there with him. But, you know, he wrote so many great pieces of literature. He wrote, like, you know, as I said, The Colour of Magic. He wrote, you know, Hogfather, which is a great. Most of his works have been adapted for screen.
Wow.
You know, particularly some of his newer ones, because people have just kind of like they love his work so much.
Has there been any movies based on his stuff?
I don't think there's been any movies, which is a shame. But there's been TV adaptations in the UK.
Oh wow!
That's and there's been one stage thing. Right. So here's the Discworld series books, and these aren't all he's written. As I said, he's written so many more. Can you see?
Let me see. Oh. Just zoom in on you. Oh wow!
They're all his books that of one series. Like, there's so many. You know, and all of them in their own right are just utterly fantastic. I love them. I would recommend them to anyone, and I hope that people continue to buy and enjoy his books even after he's died, because he seriously deserves it. He's got a legacy that's going to go on for thousands and thousands of years, because he is one of the founding faces of modern fantasy and science fiction. He's so, I find him personally quite underappreciated. You hear about J.K. Rowling, you know, with Harry Potter. You hear about all those writers, but you never hear about how well Terry Pratchett's latest book did, because he's underappreciated, and I sincerely hope that anyone watching this who wants to get into a new series, and who wants to explore something new, just please read one of his books, because the minute that you read a book of his, you will absolutely just, I think you'll love it, because he's got so much imagination.
Now, do you own all his books, or?
I don't own all his books, but I've read the majority of these, particularly his later ones, like these ones down here.
Okay.
But I'm now going to make the conscious effort to read all of his books, because I owe him that much. Even before I knew what Doctor Who was, I knew what Terry Pratchett was. So I would say that he's definitely one of the few that started my love of fantasy, science fiction, even literature in itself.
Right.
Because he's ridiculously amazing at what he did. And to continue on after you get something like Alzheimer's,
right,
where it's you kind of it's impossible to find a way through. It can never be cured. It's there with you. It's just
they're working on something now, actually.
Yeah.
But it's a shame. Like, I mean, wish we could have had it for him to save him. But
it was so.
Do you have an image of his last book coming out, or no?
I don't know if they've released the cover. The promising thing is that because of recent events, they might push the. It was supposed to be released in September, but it's no doubt they'll push it forward, because sorry, The Shepherd's Crown. No, there's not been a cover.
Okay.
For his, but it will be, no doubt it will be pushed forward. Let's see if we can get onto his site. No, they've taken his site down. Yeah, what
about on Goodreads?
I'll try Goodreads. I thought no cover. I thought we would have released the cover by now, but yeah, anyone that is watching that is familiar with Pratchett and is read Pratchett for the last 20, 30 odd years,
right,
even 40, that be happy that we at least get one more, because many writers die and they never get.
Right, they don't finish their work.
Yeah. He finished it last summer. I don't know why it's taken this long to publish, actually, because it's normally out within a few months of him finishing it, because he's such a quick writer. He's like, he can finish several books. He's a bit like James Patterson, but on a less extreme scale, because we all know how much James Patterson clearly likes to write, because he does like 12 books in a month, I think.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he finishes 2 or 3 a year, but I just absolutely adore his work, and I will continue to adore.
Let me tell you something. Getting 3 out in a year is hard. Yeah. I mean, I've done it, but it's just imagine the dedication this guy had, where he did this for decades. That's just I don't know if I could be able to do something like that. But absolutely amazing. I just want to read this
obituary from the BBC. It's quite long, but I'll go through it quickly, because
no, don't go through it quickly. You got the floor. Go.
Right, okay. Terry Pratchett proved that it was possible for a world to be flat. He first created Discworld in 1983 because he wanted to have fun with some of the cliches of fantasy novels. Pratchett's whimsical writings endeared him to millions of avid fans across the world, but in later years he fought a much publicized battle against Alzheimer's disease. Terence David John Pratchett was born on 28th of April 1948 near Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire.
An only child, he spent his early years in a house with no running water or electricity, but he said that the family never felt deprived. It was right after the war, so if you had a house with a roof on it, you were ahead of the game, he said. You see, he's so full of humour that it's like, you know, how he was. I've never seen him like go into an interview at anything downhearted, because he just was so full of life. Pratchett later remembered an idyllic childhood spent playing with other village children in local fields and woods. He vividly recalled a visit to London in 1954 when his mother took him to the Gamgee's department store in Holborn. The small boy was overcome by the bright lights and vast range of toys. Lots of my future writing started to happen on that day, he later said. An early interest in astronomy was sparked when he began collecting a series of cards called Brook Bond T packets entitled Out into Space. When his parents bought him a telescope, he spent hours out in the dark garden peering into the sky. Pratchett was also an avid reader of The Wind and the Willows, and became a major influence on his later writing, together with his growing collection of sci-fi books. He left school at 17 and got a job as a trainee reporter on a local newspaper, where, among other things, he wrote children's stories under the pen name Uncle Jim. Out of one of these columns, written in what would become his trademark whimsical style, came the characters that eventually populated his first book. His breakthrough came in 1968 while interviewing a publisher, Peter Bander Van Duren. He casually mentioned he had been working on a manuscript. Van Duren and his business partner, Colin Smith, read the draft, and The Carpet People was published in 1971. According to Smith, the book received few reviews, but they were ecstatic, with one describing it as of quite extraordinary quality. Pratchett followed this up with his only two purely science fiction novels, The Dark Side of the Sun, published in 1976, and Strata 5 years later. The latter work introduced the concept of a flat world, something that would surface again in Pratchett's most popular series of novels. Nothing in the universe is natural in the strictest sense of the term, Pratchett said of Strata. Everything from planets to stars is a relic of previous races and civilizations. Pratchett was a great computer fan, writing his earlier novels on an Amstrad word processor before switching to a PC as the technology improved. Loath to abandon the security of a full-time job, he continued to work as a journalist before becoming a press officer at the Central Electricity Generating Board. He had responsibility for 3 nuclear power stations and began his new post with impeccable timing, just after the partial meltdown of the reactor at 3 Mile Island in the US. About every Friday, one of the reactors would blow up. Again, he joked later in an interview with the sci-fi.com website. It was my job to say, well, we didn't leave much radioactivity. We could barely see it. In 1983, Pratchett published The Colour of Magic, in what would become the Discworld series of books. It was more a collection of short stories than a novel, but boasted by a serialization of the story on the BBC's Woman's Hour. The paperback edition, published in 1985, established Pratchett's reputation. The nature of Discworld gave me the opportunity to do all kinds of things, he said. I could fit more or less anything into it. By about book 4, I discovered the joy of plot. By the time that fourth Discworld book, More, was published in 1987, Pratchett felt confident enough to become a full-time writer. While Discworld remained at the centre of Pratchett's output, by 2013 he had published 40 novels in the canon, while also writing some horror fiction and a number of children's books. His style of writing was nothing if not eccentric. He avoided chapters where possible on the basis that they broke up the narrative, and peppered his text with footnotes. Pratchett also used punctuation as a source of humour. His character Death always conversed in capital letters, while the auditors of reality eschewed quotation marks. He drew heavily on real people. For many of his characters, Leonardo da Vinci, for example, became the painter and engineer Leonard of Quern. Many of his works were adopted for the stage, and animated versions of some of his children's stories, including Truckers, have appeared on TV. He fought a running battle against critics who said fantasy would never be considered as literature. Stories of imagination, he said witheringly, tend to upset those without one. Away from writing, he maintained an interest in astronomy and natural history. He became a campaigner to promote the conservation of the orangutan, and the librarian in Pratchett's Unseen University became the shape of an orangutan, ideal for his work. In 2007, Pratchett announced that what he had thought were the symptoms of a mild stroke were in fact the signs of early onset Alzheimer's disease. In a public statement headed "An Embuggerance," the author assured fans that this should be interpreted as "I am not dead. For me, this may be further off than you think." Pratchett, determined to battle the disease, donated £500,000 to an Alzheimer's research charity, and set about trying a number of possible cures. He made a 2-part documentary for the BBC, Living with Alzheimer's, in which he learned more about the disease and discussed its effects on his life and writing. Pratchett became a campaigner for assisted suicide in 2009, the same year in which he was awarded a knighthood for services to literature. The following year, he was chosen to give the BBC Richard Dimbleby lecture on the subject, Shaking Hands with Death. The words had to be delivered by actor Tony Robinson, and the disease had affected Pratchett's ability to read. Pratchett also introduced a BBC documentary entitled Terry Pratchett, Choosing to Die, which won an award at the Scottish BAFTAs. Despite his illness, he continued to write, either using word recognition software or dictating his words to an assistant. In an interview with the Mail on Sunday in 2009, he was sanguine about his prospects. "I intend, before the endgame looms, to die sitting in a chair in my own garden with a glass of brandy in my hand and Thomas Tallis on the iPod. The latter because Thomas's music could lift even an atheist a little bit closer to heaven. Oh, and since this is England, I had better add, if wet, in the library." So, yeah, you could see that obviously he was a very humorous man.
Wow.
You know, he was so full of life even after the Alzheimer's, and so, you know, he was just ridiculously good. And it's such a, you know, like you with Leonard Nimoy a few weeks ago, Joe.
Yeah.
This for me is like that. It's just absolutely crushing that, you know, we'll no longer be seeing books after, you know, September, or if they, you know, push it forward, you know, we'll no longer be seeing his name with any new titles on the shelves. So, you know, to fans of his and people who, you know, are possible to becoming fans, you know, are open to reading his books, please read his books, become fans, continue his legacy, and, you know, just continue his legacy, because he seriously deserves, you know, so much, you know, pride, you know, fame, you know, recognition even after his death, because this man is a visionary in fantasy, and it's just such a loss. And, you know, I hope that, you know, Alzheimer's is cured, or at least gets a temporary cure, you know, soon, and that this guy, you know, his campaigns for Alzheimer's and for assisted suicide are recognised, because, you know, even the I think David Cameron made a statement, the British Prime Minister, you know, just saying how absolutely gutted he was that he heard that Pratchett died, because he's such a, in the UK, he's such a celebrity, he's so famous.
Yeah.
You know.
I'm very sorry for, you know, this loss. You know, I know, like you said, I was destroyed with Leonard Nimoy, and you know, he meant a lot to you, and very, very interesting life. You know, I'm gonna probably get his first book and get into that. You know.
Yeah, seriously.
Very touching show, Connor.
Yeah.
You did fantastic, by the way.
Thank you. He deserves it, you know. I always said that I owe Terry Pratchett for where I am now, in terms of, you know, aspirations, in terms of, you know, he was an inspiration, and I'm just really crushed.
I know.
That he's gone, you know.
I'm sorry, man.
It's fine.
All right, bro, you can close. You know, you did so beautifully, so whatever you want to say in closing.
Yeah, so R.I.P. Terry Pratchett, you know, you will be missed.
Okay. That's it, guys. Take care. Bye for now.